Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum
Ameen.
salam.
Dear friends, brothers and sisters, we are here again together. This is Saturday, 30th of July, 2022, with Brother Anwar in South Africa. And we're going to continue our series of discussions having to do with early Islamic history and the problems that we are having with the traditional understanding of Islamic doctrines, especially those regarding the Hadith and certain rituals which are not exactly, if I can use the word kosher, with respect to having been established by the Prophet.
Mm.
It is my understanding, dear brother, from my own personal readings, in addition to some discussions with yourself and a few other people, that
Mm.
traditional Islam does not represent the true Muslim path of true guidance. It is something that has been, mm, how shall I say, subverted. And as I've said before, this is a traditional thing which has happened to all other major religions. The bringer of the religion, the messenger, if you will, no matter who it was or who it is, has brought a message from of divine order, of divine instruction to
Mm.
mankind, because we are in need of that.
Mm.
As the scripture says, we are in need of this light upon light. We
Mm.
have that light in us. We have the kun fire kun that gives us our being, that gives us our spiritual nature, our physical nature. We have that.
Mm.
And we have a certain amount of guidance from that. But we do not have the complete guidance. That is why Islam is called a light upon light, because what we
Mm.
need is that light from the samawat. And
Mm.
in order to attain that samawat, to attain unto that guidance, we need to connect. And that's the purpose of salat, but not the salat that we have learned in
Mm.
the traditional sense.
Mm.
Now, this is something that has happened to all religions. The messenger comes, and within 2 or 3 generations of the messenger's departure, the message is distorted. It becomes subverted for the uses of political hegemony, if you will, and it becomes then further solidified and concretized, these vain traditions, in terms of doctrines or catechisms, if you will,
Yeah.
using the Catholic word, that cement the position of the priesthood.
Mm.
Now, the messengers do not establish a priesthood. The messengers, as I understand them, were just men or even women,
Mm.
just normal people doing a normal task of living and finding their way in the earth. And they are brought to some point of understanding that they have something to say to their brothers and sisters, which affects salvation.
Mm.
And salvation is certainly of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is not a unilateral decision. It is something that we have to take part in. We have to receive the salvation, and then we have to activate it.
Mm.
So this brings us to the deen, and this brings us to the union of faith with actions. And the actions must be those that perform good deeds, you see, because that's all we take with us when we leave here.
Mm.
We bring with us this fitra, this kun fire kun, and then Allah adds to it guidance by means of these messengers and messages. And then we add to this kun fire kun the result of that guidance, which is the performance of good deeds as they pertain to each generation and the development of mankind that is congruent with that particular generation.
mm,
Now, when the message has been diverted and subverted, we then have the performance of good and bad deeds, which brings us back to the garden and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, or good and evil, if you will. Evil being the performance of deeds which bring harm. And you can bring harm knowingly and unknowingly. So that means you can perform evil consciously. You can also perform it unconsciously by serving those who do it consciously, and that appears to be the situation that the not only the Ummah is in, but the entire world is in, as right now, as we approach the COVID, the age of COVID, the age of the COVID scam, the great COVID lie, and the emergence of the New World Order in terms of this new economic crisis that is being
mm,
fabricated, just like many of the hadith have been fabricated, you see. So now, let me take this one step further until I turn, before I turn the floor over to you, dear brother.
mm,
And hopefully this will um, lead into a compatible discourse that will lead into what it is that Allah has placed on your heart to share with us today. So far in our discussions, we have introduced the idea of the um, the two dynasties, the Umayyad and the Abbasid, and then we led then further into what became the dynasty known as the Ottoman Empire later, several hundred years later. Now, I'm not an expert in this history. I'm not a historian. I have some knowledge of occult history, but it's my understanding from what little I do know of history and of Islamic history that there are a couple of things that get done here. When historians begin to review the history, they get lost in the details, and then when you get lost in the details, it's like being lost in the forest. You maybe you can identify some of the trees, but you forget where you are,
mm,
and maybe you can't find your way out. You see, because you've spent too much time studying the trees and you've lost your way, you've lost the path, so to speak. And the path, if you are lost, every good forester knows that if you want to really find your way out, you got to get down to the rivers because the rivers always lead someplace where there are settlements. And if you're fortunate enough, you live long enough to reach something that resembles civilization, da 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 da. But most of our historians get lost in the details and they never get back to the rivers. They never get back to the streams, to the waters that can guide them back to safer ground, safer territory, and
mm,
out of the wilderness of sin, the wilderness of misguidance. Now, a lot of this misguidance that has affected the Umayyads and the Abbasids for hundreds of years. The Umayyads not for that long, but the Abbasids certainly for 300 to 500 years or so. Um, and seems to have come from Jews, but not just Jews, not just any group of Jews. Okay, not just the Jews that were conveniently in Medina at the time, and they weren't just conveniently there; they were the dominion in Medina. If you study the history soundly, which most historians don't do, they don't look at the details. The Medina Jews were the only ones with a castle in in,
mm,
in Medina. You see, so
mm,
that means that stands for something. That was in the occult world. You see, the occult magi, whom the prophet warned us of, and others warned us of as well, which we haven't taken those warnings seriously enough. At least many of our scholars have not taken them seriously enough. The occult meaning of the castle is devotion to the god of war. All right. the god of forces. That's what it is. Now, you can, if you want to be a scapegoat, you can say, okay, well, it's the devil's fault, or the god of forces is the devil, the god of forces is Iblis, if you will. But no, the god of forces is selfishness. That's what it is. And you can devote yourself to this, and you can create a cult from it. You can create fellowships who are devoted to it. You can create a round table devoted to evil, or you can create a round table devoted to good. The problem is that over the course of the centuries in all these empires, people have created round tables devoted to evil and while pretending they were good. And this is the basis for hypocrisy, which serves selfishness. And they then devote themselves to the outward appearance of religion, which is this vain piety. So, are these only the Jews who do this? No, no, not by any stretch of the imagination, but they have perfected the art, the political art of this subterfuge, and the political art of this kind of elitist organization that is devoted to evil, devoted to selfishness, because that's what evil is. It's a the selfish devotion to personal gain. And this is greed, you see, if you will, so that we devote ourselves to the light that is within us, but we pervert it, and then we pursue what is going to satisfy that light while pretending to enter the Sambavat. So that seems to me to be the ultimate goal and purpose of any kind of subversion of truth, any kind of subversion of the message that is brought by the messengers. So now, one more thing, dear brother, bear with me, because I'm trying to summarize uh, what we have discussed so far and what I have learned so far before we then bring in your rooms of knowledge that Allah has shared with you, which will likely confirm some of the things which I've just said here. Now, these people, these Jews, who are not Jews, by the way, but they're Jews in the terms that we call them today. That's an interesting phrase that's used in both the uh, Bible and the Quran, Jews who are not Jews. And I'm not sure that I understand that completely, but I have some insights to it. In any case, if we take the Quran literally with respect to Harut and Marut, and with respect to Yuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog, then we can form a workable theory, a likely theory, that these people aligned themselves with those who were in Babylon at the time of Harut and Marut, who taught men evil, but then at the same time taught them not to blaspheme. They said, don't attribute it to Allah. Don't attribute any of this to Allah. We are only teaching you. Now you have to ask the question: well, why are we teaching? Why were these messengers, these angels, teaching this knowledge of evil? And you have to. The only reason is so that those people who are supposed to organize the roundtables to defend what is good by performing justice will recognize the evil for what it is, and not only that, but recognize its organization. Now, this has gone unrecognized by most of our scholars, especially scholars of today. They do not recognize the evil roundtables, and we can start with Tavistock in London, okay, which almost everyone knows about or has at least heard about. And if you mention the word Tavistock and you look into it, from the time of Freud to the present day, you'll find out that they are responsible for the rock foundation of all political propaganda, which has affected the mind control apparati that now controls the world. It begins there. But that's not the origin. The origin is in Babylon with Harut and Marut. And the Jews who are not Jews joined with those particular group of magi and initiates and magicians in Babylon at the time, and they learned these tricks, how to separate man from wife, and that is division. Now, we're not just talking about breaking up husband and wife, that's a simple matter. What we're talking about is breaking up the unity between the light that's in us and the light that is in heaven, the light upon light. You see, so they came in between and they established a political system here that all that formed a kind of bronze covering over the Samawat, so that men no longer were able to enter the Samawat, but only had the illusion that they were doing so. And this is the whole point of the traditions. You see, they create an illusion and they separate us from true guidance. You see. Now, how can you say that, Dr. Omar? Oh my God. Well, it's not difficult because you see most of the people who are so-called traditionalists in Muslim society today, those who are claiming to be Allah's servant, are following the COVID scam, including the professionals. And these are supposed to be our leaders, you see, our imams, if you will. They're all climbing together in a bus, shoulder to shoulder, and then going to mosque to pray with the mask on and standing 6 feet apart. This is ludicrous. These are morons. And you expect us to follow them and claim that they are guiding us or allowing us to create this conduit to the Samawat and allow light upon light to enter us? No way, as the Mexicans would say, no way, Jose. This is not happening. All right. This is not happening. They are not guided, and these are the ones who are supporting the traditional doctrines, which we are trying to explain to our brothers and sisters, have not been useful with respect to true guidance, and it's brought us to this position. Now, the final statement before turning the floor over to you, brother, is that these Jews and who are not Jews, and these magi who are not true, uh, how shall I say, students of Zoroaster or whatever other religion they thought they were following, including Islam, they were all Persians, you see, from the land of, um, what's it called, Khorasan, you see, they were all Persians. And this Persian influence continued into the Abbasid period for hundreds of years. And it continued into the Fatimid dynasty as well, because the Jew who established the Fatimid dynasty was a Jew magi from the Babylonian school, which I mentioned to you was established 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, under Hammurabi and other of those kings to keep their books, you see, to keep their debts, their books of debts, you see. And this was in the realm where the so-called Ashkenazi, not the Ashkenazi, the other one, the other school of Jews came out of, you see, went to northern Jerusalem. So these people have since formed a clique. And if you trace them very carefully, you find that they wound up in the Vatican, you see. And if we look at the influences of great families in the world today, we'll find Vatican connections all the way around. Not just to Jews who are not Jews, but to these ancient people that became the modern day elitists, these families that are now governing the world. And they are not the presidents, they are not the prime ministers. Those are just front men. Behind them is where you have to look. And then you have to look even behind the families who support them and put them into power. So, with that being said, brother, we have this influence, which I've just described in a very quick summary. We have this influence from Khorasan, right, from the Persian Empire, the ancient Persian Empire, continuing into Islam for hundreds of years. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me. If I'm right, please shed some more light on it for my sake and the sake of our listeners, dear brother Anwar,
Mm.
inshallah.
Thank you, Dr. Zaid. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه. We thank Almighty Allah for bringing us together over this medium, and it's an extreme privilege and honor to be in your company, Dr. Zaid. Your knowledge in the particular topic that you have raised far surpasses what I've been able to investigate or uncover. And I would like to really delve more into those topics, and in particular the historicity or the length of time during which this source of misguidance and, as you call it, the arts of Harut and Marut, that is an area of investigation that I think is something that I would really like to investigate and read more into. What I can add, though, is that although the people that we refer to now as the Jews, which I regard more as an element of deception within the ranks of humanity, and at
Mm-hmm.
times the title or the label Jew might be applicable, and at times you might require a different label. Uh,
Mm.
I do think it is by their description that we should identify them, and not by the ethnicity or the religious adherence. And so I think for any person watching this might draw the simplistic or reductionist conclusion that what we are talking about here are those people who call themselves Jews in today's world. And look, I do believe that you will get probably the most trained con artists within the oldest community amongst the family of communities in the world. And that community goes back all the way to Babylon, the original civilization, the original sophistry preached by Harut and Marut,
Mm.
type of deceptive communication. And I, I think I really can. I sense, I can see what you mean by that. It is the art of deception, the art of gaining power through breaking the connection between people. And yeah, if we have to use the term Jewish to describe him, I think the only reason that will be is because of the length of experience that community has had. And the Quran, of course, uses Bani Israel as a very prominent case study in
Yes,
terms of
yes, indeed.
all the possible things that could go wrong. So I think it is in that context that I think I read your description of these sowers of deception and deviation. Dr. Zaid, my knowledge really goes back to the Prophet's time and the eras that followed that his time.
Mm.
And you mentioned something about the Umayyad being Jewish influenced. Strangely enough, I got the impression that tag or that attribute would be more befitting on the Abbasid
Mm-hmm.
period, because the Abbasids, they obviously operated from the same geographical area where ancient Babylon is located.
Yes.
In fact, Baghdad, as I've mentioned in my previous discussions with you, is very, very near to the home of Talmudic or rabbinical Judaism, the
Mm-hmm.
birthplace of the Mishnah, of the Babylonian Mishnah, of the Mishnah.
Yes.
From,
Mm-hmm.
and so the scholarship there, I see more of an opportunity for a cross pollination or influencing from those ancient scholars at Surat and Pumbedita, those ancient Talmudic seminaries located near to Baghdad. And of course, there wasn't much of an opportunity during the time of the Prophet. There wasn't even much of an opportunity during the time of the guided caliphs, like when Imam Ali was based in Baghdad. I don't think there was much of an opportunity, but the real opportunity came when the first Umayed caliphs came to power. And initially, also for about 150 years, the Abbasid caliphs, the original Abbasid caliphs were very, very rationalistic. They were not very doctrinal or very ritualistic, or in any sense, as you know, the old Zoroastrian practices were highly ritual based. Even the Talmudic approach to Judaism, rabbinical Judaism, highly ritualistic, highly based on commemoration and on some symbolism. And the original Abbasid period, what we call the golden age of Islam, is really devoid of that type of Zoroastrian, Talmudic, overt ritualization and symbology and that type of thing. So that really follows about 250 years into the Abbasid period, where there enough time had elapsed for people then to turn symbols into, or artifacts, into means of control. And it was then that artifacts, for example, the words of the Prophet is an artifact.
Yes.
These artifacts were then employed very, very successfully to destroy or to hijack the original pure and simple idea of Islam. I'm so, it is so heartwarming when you speak, Dr. Zaid. What I hear is somebody that is not contaminated by the brainwashing. Obviously, it takes so much effort for somebody like me, who has gone through a madrasa system, we spent 10 years being indoctrinated with the ideas, with viewing hadith, with viewing the personalities within hadith as sacred objects of sacredness, that it almost becomes an impossibility to relinquish or to abandon. For somebody like you, alhamdulillah, you have never been, your eyes see the truth a bit clearer than I guess what we are able to. But I think, just to summarize, I don't want to also carry on too long. Maybe you can respond and we can explore one or two of these ideas. But the idea that the Abbasids are really the ones that breathed in these ideas that you refer to as the ideas of Harut and Marut, the way in which you deceive, the way you control humanity, the way you invoke or employ symbolism and artifacts of sacredness, ostensible sacredness, how they then carted in all these sacred artifacts, the hadith, the personalities of the Sahabi, the forefathers, even the very Quran was celebrated not for its content, but for the very for the sheets, for the parchments on which it was written. So they kissed it, and then they would, use it for good luck and as a good luck charm. But the words were completely forgotten. And I think that type of development or deviation really steps in within the latter or the second half of the Abbasid, when you have the Seljuk Turks, who is the most powerful force. We're talking about the children of Genghis Khan, who is the most powerful military force in the world at the time. When they then take charge of the religious institutions, they take charge of the meaning of Islam, of what Islam really entails. And it is under them that this Islam that you refer to, an Islam that has been completely overshadowed by myths and by false rituals, was created. and of course finalized towards the Ottoman period. And then the Ottomans were basically just, perpetuating what they were taught. And it is Islam that is so distant from the original idea, the simple idea of, that you refer to as just righteous beliefs, righteous actions. And that is the Islam we are fighting or we are arguing for, inshallah. I had since I just want to slip this one in also. One of the powerful artifacts or symbols that is invoked is what people refer to as the Salafus Salih. I don't know if you've heard the term. The Salafus Salih means the sacred Salaf. The Salaf referring to the original, the founding fathers or the founding generations. And the Salaf would generally be referred to as the period of the Prophet and his companions, and those who followed them. And in the third generation, those who followed those two. So the Salafus Salih is today a very, very powerful brand of Islam. In fact, if you look at YouTube, you'll see that 3 or 4 of the top most popular YouTubers, let me just think of a few names there. Muhammad Hijab, or the others, Ali Dawah. There's some more also. Some of them are based in the West, in fact. They adhere very firmly to this concept of the Salafus Salih. It's almost like, we know that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these guys, they invoke the Salafus Salih. In fact, they are referred to as the Salafists, the Salafists. Now, they invoke the grandeur, the nobility, the piety of these first generations. And what they try to do is to recreate that era. They actually, the thrust of their argument which they make is that the Salafus Salih is the ideal Islam. It's the model. And to strengthen their position, they would then, in all possible ways, sacralize or deify, almost to a point of deifying some of the characters. Like the memory of Abu Huraira. He could memorize 20,000 hadiths, never forget. That is affording superhuman powers. Bukhari, he could collect 650,000 hadiths in 10 years. If you really add it up, it's not possible.
Yes, of course.
So they afford superhuman powers to these Salafus Salih. I just heard something the other day also. I heard it in a mosque somewhere. This absolutely ridiculous feat that was performed by one of the Sahabis. And they invoke this false symbolism, or this to then argue for us to return to the hadith. So basically, the Salafus Salih means a return to the hadith, and it is not it is therefore not unexpected that the Salafus Salih are also the Ahlul Hadith today, to a large extent. And some of the prominent hadith scholars like Albani in Saudi Arabia today, I think he's passed away, but they are absolutely fervent adherents to the science of hadith. In fact, their Islam is 90% shaped by hadith. And the problem with the Salafus Salih is it's all a lie. It's a complete lie. There is no such a thing as a Salafus Salih. I've got a verse here from the Quran where it belies completely the idea of the Salafus Salih. I want you just to quickly recite this. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم ومن ينقلب على عقبيه فلن يضر الله شيئا وسيجزي الله ash-shakirin. Muhammad is only a messenger, and many a messenger has gone before him. So what if he dies or is killed? Will you turn back and go away? And but he who turns back and goes away in haste will do no harm to Allah. The verse here clearly raises the prospect of when the Prophet dies, you will turn around and go back to your old ways. And what we
Hmm.
know now, established from history, is that immediately upon the death of the Prophet, an estimated 100,000 people were killed in civil wars amongst Muslims. Now, these are the Salafus Salih. I want to emphasize the people, the 100,000 people estimated to have died in the Battle of the Camel, the Battle of Siffin, the battle, between Sayyidina Ali and
Hmm.
Aisha, between Muawiyah, between Ibn Zubayr, and
Hmm.
because these were all tabi'een, these were all Salafus Salih. They massacred each other with swords and with spears. One
Hmm.
scholar, contemporary Egyptian scholar, what is his name? He he says that if you had given that generation machine guns and
Hmm.
mortar guns and
Hmm.
nuclear weapons, they would have annihilated mankind probably.
Oh
That's
my
a
gosh.
contemporary
Yeah.
Egyptian
Hmm.
scholar. The amount of violence and often to the point of barbarous violence, where
Yes, yes.
people were mutilated. The Prophet's
Mm.
own grandson, it is definitely established from multiple sources in history that he was decapitated and
Hmm.
dismembered. His body was dismembered.
Yes.
Is that the Salafus Salih? What I'm saying is
Yes,
that
yes.
the
Of
Salafus
course.
Salih is a myth. It's a myth.
Yes.
If the Salafus Salih had access to guns, nuclear weapons, and to the type of missiles and
Hmm.
warplanes that we have today, they would have wiped out the planet. And and
Mm.
and, and so this Egyptian scholar, I'll get his name now to credit him. He then argues that the Salafus Salih is more likely the present generation. You know, the Salafus Salih, or the generation, or the Qarnus Salih, the more pious era, could possibly be more appropriately referred to as our time, because we have decided to change direction in our time. Inshallah, what you are doing and what I'm doing and what many of us are doing is to change direction for for uh,
Yes.
for this
Yes.
community.
This is part of an appropriate revision, as best as I can tell.
Mm,
And it's been ongoing for the last 50, 60 years, but it's not been noised abroad. And those people who are involved in this kind of revision are selectively marginalized one way or another by
mm,
the traditionalists, and always without solid foundation, without solid logic, without sound reasoning based on facts,
yeah.
you see, and most often without referring to the Holy Quran, but only referring to Hadith to
Mm,
support their position. And this is like, as the New Testament calls, building a castle on sand.
yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
that castle, that rock upon which they think they stand, will dissipate and it will just simply melt away on the day of judgment.
Mm,
So I think that you're very correct there, and I count myself fortunate, and those of my students and those who are keep me company in this time, like
mm,
yourself. I count ourselves fortunate and blessed and guided by Allah to pursue this path, the path which we're trying to, as just like any man cutting through the jungle with a paran, you've got to clear the way. You've got to cut away all
yeah.
the overgrowth in
Mm,
order to make it easier for those who follow you. to walk. And I feel that we're kind of in that vanguard, but we're also standing on the shoulders of those people who've gone before us and who have made these things known to us in the literature that is rarely read by people who have become traditionally illiterate. Now, what I mean by that is they've become functional literates. They've become functionally literate, but they're illiterate is with respect to the truth. So they're literate in the ways of the misguidance, but illiterate in the manner of guidance. You see, I don't know how many students who come to me always with the same question, and they say, "How do I get this light upon light? How do I get this guidance? I've been kissing the rug all these years, 5 times a day, and it's not working. What's going on? I'm surrounded by people who are perplexed. I'm
Yeah.
surrounded by perverts. I'm surrounded by hypocrites. I'm surrounded by oppressors. I'm surrounded by oppression. I'm surrounded by debt. I'm surrounded by sin. Where is this guidance, Dr. Omar? Where is it? You see, I get this question all the time. How can I perform Hijra? It's not that, well, you have to be guided to do that. You just can't decide on yourself, I've got to get out of here. And if you do decide you got to get out of here, you better ask Allah how to do it, where to go, and if you have His permission to leave. You see, these are not things that you can just decide on your own to do. So, this guidance, dear brother, that we're talking about, that I'm talking about right now in response to you, is missing. This satisfaction, this Islamic satisfaction is missing in most of our brothers and sisters. I can tell you right now that as I sit here, I have it. I have experienced it. I know this light upon light. It's not a mystery to me.
Yeah.
I know it. So, and how to explain it to other people is not so easy, although it's a simple thing to do. And why do I say it's not so easy? Well, because you have to overcome all this overgrowth. You see, you've got to cut that away. And hopefully, many of the students whom I can guide have been involved in trying to cut that stuff away themselves. And it makes it easier. They just need confirmation. They need some sort of consolidation of things that are already in them. You see, that's the light upon light. And that's why we are involved in this guidance and in this revision, you see. But how do you do that? How do you do that? You have to act on what you say you believe. And this is faith with good works. But it's also faith that activates what Allah guides you to do. If Allah guides you and says, I want you to go with so and you don't do it, or I want you to leave so and so, or divorce them from your life, and you don't do it, and you know it's in your heart because you know that they're misguiding you, because the people that you hang out with, you become like them. This is psychological truth, sociological truth. You become like the people that you associate with, you see. And so if you're associated with oppressors, you're going to become an oppressor. If you hang with them and you sit out late until the evening and smoke the shishka with them, you're going to become like them, you see. I stopped going to masjid years ago. Why? Because I found out that many, not just a few, many of the men that I was standing shoulder to shoulder with while I was kissing the rug with them on Jummah, you see, were oppressing their wives and their daughters. And some of those mullahs, not a few, were oppressing the boys under their care by practicing sodomy with them in the madrasas. Okay. I stopped associating with these people because when I confronted them with this fact, they refused to invite me back to talk, you see, or to teach them, or to preach, or whatever the case might be. you see. So I said to myself, well, how can I stand there and expect Allah to answer my prayer if I'm going to honor these hypocrites, if I'm going to honor these oppressors, if I'm going to honor these sinners by pretending that they're good and righteous people when in fact they're not,
Yeah.
you see. So I stopped going, and I was one of a few of the alim I was associated with who also decided for the same reasons. But we remained quiet. I never remained quiet. My companions, they were a bit like Nicodemus, who, went to visit Jesus, on the sly at nighttime when
Yeah.
no one would see him, you see. But me, never. I always spoke the truth. I was always outspoken. I'm an extrovert. I've always been that way since I was a child. So I've remained true to that fitra because Allah has placed it in me, you see. So what we're talking about here, brother, is the overgrowth, how it came into place. All this misguidance that overgrew. It's you build a city, okay. You cut away the jungle. You build a city. You establish a civilized way of living. Everyone has to have a place, a shelter, a roof over their head. You've got to have water, crops, all this sort of thing. You've got to have food to eat, and if you abandon those ways of keeping this place righteous, the jungle takes it over again. And you see, as caliph, we're supposed to be managing the jungle. Now, I'm not talking about clearing it just so we could, make money. I'm talking about managing nature so that it serves us in the cause of Allah. And the cause of Allah is to save the seed. It is to save the righteous seed in mankind, those children of Adam that Allah has spoken to from before the incarnation.
Yeah.
Am I not your Lord? And we all stood and said, yes, you are. Okay, well, if you are, then you're going to come to earth and you're going to prove it to me. You see, we need to prove ourselves. All those who are under or over the age of innocence, we have to prove ourselves. And this is by consciously choosing to do what is right. Now, if you consciously choose to live with this overgrowth, you see, and consider that guidance, then you have these students coming to me and say, how do I get this guidance? I'm surrounded by all this oppression, the overgrowth. How do you do it? You got to cut that stuff away. You got to clear the streets. You've got to make sure that the water is not clogged, the drains are not clogged up with rubbish so that it doesn't flood when it rains. You see, all of this stuff you have to do. This requires work. This requires justice. It does not require submission to people who are lying to you. And so, what we're doing, dear brother, with our conversations here, inshallah, is we're identifying the people who lied to the Ummah 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Who are they? What were their lies? I've heard preachers, mainstream preachers, come online on YouTube and say, yes, most of the hadith are fabricated, but we still endorse them. And then my immediate response is, okay, well, tell us which ones are fabricated. And they don't do that. You see, they don't really confirm. They've got 30 levels of hadith. This. But look, your man on the street, your lady who's slaving away in the kitchen, trying to keep her children clean and fed for her busy husband who's, working to pay the Jew who's not a Jew. Okay? They don't have time to discern these answers. They depend upon the teachers, the scholars, to tell them, okay, this is acceptable. This is a lie. This is a fabrication. So I listened to Hamza Yusuf and I said, okay, well, good. I'm glad to hear him say that. Then my immediate question was, okay, then write the book and tell us which ones are not fabrications, please. And they don't do that. They don't do that, brother. Now, my question to you, now that I brought it up, is why don't they do that?
No, it's the reason for the existence, Dr. Zaid. You are trying to remove his, as the French say, raison d'être. If there are no hadiths, they have no purpose, because
Oh
their
dear.
purpose is to make sense of this gobbledygook that they, you see, their only
Mhm,
purpose is to stand there and make sense of the confusion on a Friday, because
mhm,
and to decipher it in a way that serves their purpose and the purpose of those who are powerful in
mhm,
society. And that's really
mhm.
the aim of it. I've realized long ago it's easier to pervert something than to destroy it. And the forces, the anti-God forces, early on realized that they will not destroy the Quran. It's too hard-coded. It's too
Yes,
secure.
yes,
It's
it
too
is.
powerful. And they needed to pervert it. And that was the answer. And
Ah,
they created more than 500,000 verses in addition to the 6,200 verses.
mhm,
The
mhm,
Quran has no more than 6,300 verses. I think it's 6,200, but there are
mhm,
many repeats also. So let's say 6,000 unique verses,
mhm.
and you have 500,000 hadith spread within probably 50 to 100 compendiums or sets of books,
Mhm.
mutually contradictory, um, and with with complete impossibility for anyone to make sense of it. And so what you need is you need a a brotherhood, you need a fraternity, you
Mhm.
need a what is the word? Yeah, I guess a brotherhood, what that could formulate an orthodoxy out of this mess.
Mhm.
And pretty much like Christianity, if you really look at all the books in the Old and the New Testament, there's it's not possible to extract or infer the core doctrines of Christianity. It requires a brotherhood and the enforcement of a state with arms, a
Yes.
state using the penalty, force of violence, or the threat of violence to impose those doctrines. And those doctrines were imposed through the barrel of a gun and by means of a sword very
Yes.
early on in Islam.
Yes.
And lo and behold, if you refused to comply with the orthodoxy, and so that brotherhood is the very people that you find on the pulpits on a Friday. Where do they come from? They all study in Medina, they study in Egypt, they study at some foolish colleges in India and
Yes.
Pakistan. Some of them
Yes.
not so foolish. There's a college in Lucknow, I believe, where Sheikh Umar, what is his name? No, Sheikh Hussein. Hussein. I'm not. The Sheikh that is very, very popular on YouTube now. I'm just trying to think. Imran Hussein. You know,
Imran Hussein. Oh yes.
yeah, you immediately hear his outlook does not echo the orthodoxy. And
Mhm.
so you will find others, Sheikh Muhammad Al-Asi, and so just to be positive, but I think there are a growing number of scholars that are not part of the brotherhood, that are not perpetuating these doctrines and these ideas that are there to deceive and to deny the message of the Quran. And it's clearly like, short answer is they've perverted Islam, or they perverted the Quran, because they couldn't destroy the Quran. 500,000 hadiths is what it took, and a powerful orthodoxy endorsed by the state. Uh,
Yes.
these scholars do not know how to oppose a corrupt government. They don't know. It's not part of their vocabulary. It's not part of their makeup. The only
Mhm.
the only thing they know how to do is to bend the knee. They've been trained for 1,000 years These scholars have learned to bend the knee, whoever is the king, whether the king is George W. Bush or Barack Obama or the Zionist
Yes.
establishment of America.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it is the Zionist establishment of America that is really
Yes.
controlling the Fortune 500 companies. They know how to bend the knee, the pharmaceutical industry. Their best talent is bowing and groveling in front of those with power. And they
Yes.
come on Fridays and they promote that Islam, the Islam of service to powerful men instead of
Mm.
service and devotion to Allah subhanahu. So it's the reason for their existence. It's how they, like you always say beautifully, Dr. C, it's how they fill their bowl with rice. They don't have any other way of putting rice in their bowl
Yes.
except by groveling and bending their knees in front of the powerful, those who are powerful. And that is the Islam that we unfortunately have to deal with. But you've felt the peace, Dr. Zaid. You know how it feels. The Quran speaks about Ya ayyuhatun nafsul mutma'inna. Oh, you soul at rest or with comfort, with a heart that is content.
Mm.
Allah actually recognizes that attribute or that state which you have which you have described now, that feeling of peace.
Yes.
The Muslims have not known a day of that peace. Most Muslims, 90% of the Muslims, have not known a day of peace. You know why? Because they always feel they haven't done enough rakats during the night. They haven't slept. They've
Yes.
slept. They slept. They've slept 6 hours. They should have slept 2 hours. Because the Prophet they, they and
Yes.
then we sleep 2 hours, then they hear a story, some Sahabi slept 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
When they give zakah, they give of their wealth, they are being guilt tripped because some Sahabi gave all his wealth away and lived in
Mm-hmm.
the street. And so they are being put to an impossible endurance test, an,
Mm-hmm.
an irrelevant endurance test. An
Mm.
endurance test, like Allah says in the Quran, there's a verse that says, that speaks about the monasticism after
Yes.
Jesus' time,
Mm-hmm.
because Christianity became a religion of the monastery
Yes.
in the early years, in the first few centuries, I guess. In fact,
Yes.
throughout the
It,
Dark Ages,
it appears so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it was an extremely um, difficult standard to uphold. You had these uh, people in the monasteries having to be celibate, having to seclude themselves, having to have a vow of silence. And the Quran actually makes mention of that. And it says here, and we said, and monasticism, they invented. We did not prescribe it for them.
Mm-hmm.
57:27, Surah
Mm-hmm.
57, verse 27. The point
Mm.
I'm trying to make is that one day, those who are always trying to chase them more raka'ats and more this and more that and more pujis, these things where they repeat the same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
one day they will face Allah and it will be said to them, we did not prescribe it to you.
Yes.
What we did
Yes.
prescribe was to confront those who are oppressing, who are exploiting mankind.
Yes.
You had to confront those who elevated themselves to the station of godhood or to the station of being the masters of. When did you challenge? And that is the missing aspect, the missing attribute. So we're
Mm.
trying to make more and more akahats and more pujis and more this and that. Wear
Yes.
more the outfits. We try and the uglier you can grow your beard and the weirdest you can dress yourself, and this becomes your endurance test that you want to present to Allah. An irrelevant accomplishment.
Yes. Yes. My prayer, dear brother, is that we can help our listeners, our students, to make Islam more relevant. You see, the important thing that you just brought out here was this diversion. 500,000 hadith.
mm,
compared to 6,000 verses of the Quran. Now that's quite a contrast.
mm.
And if you have the mindset, if you're indoctrinated, say, well, I can't understand the Quran until I understand a 500,000 hadith.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
That's the
That
argument.
is that is a profound statement
That's
that
exactly the argument.
shows it proves subversion. That
Yeah,
proves the
that's
subversion. You see
and
right
that's
there.
exactly the argument. That is exactly when I first started asking men of knowledge. Listen, the Quran here it speaks about standing up for those who are oppressed. In my country, there was a time when we were struggling against a government that was separating the nation, and there was a lot of injustice in that for a long time.
Yes.
And we used to ask our sheikhs, our priests, to assist us in the struggle.
Hmm.
And we would find these verses in the Quran and show them. Look here, the Quran says, and why should you? وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ. The Quran says, and why should you not fight in the cause of those who, being weak, are ill-treated and oppressed? And we asked them, why are we not involved? And they
Yes.
would tell us, how can you read the Quran? You haven't studied the Asbabun Nuzul. Now, when you say the Asbabun Nuzul, they refer to the circumstances, the conditions,
Hmm.
the context which you get from the Hadith. So
Hmm.
what they are making, what they are, the trick they are playing is to make your reading of the Quran conditional, to make the reading of Hadith, those 500,000 Hadith, to make uh, your access to the Quran conditional on that
Yes.
500,000.
Hmm.
So you have to filter your Quran through that 500,000 Hadith. So obviously they are robbing us of access to the Quran.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes.
and that is why, for you to have that tranquility, you will never get it if you try to live to please 500,000 hadiths.
No.
But certainly you can find that tranquility by reading the Quran, because if you read every day one page, you should be done in a matter of a year or something.
Goodness me.
And so within 1 year, you could reach tranquility. You could know what
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
expected of you.
Yes.
If you recite the book with meaning, you soon find out that the instructions are much simpler
No.
than hadith.
They're very
You will,
simple. You just brought to my mind my initial reading of the Quran, which took me 3 days and nights.
wow.
When I finished, when I finished, the instruction was very clear.
Mm,
I had to accept the Quran as truth, and
mm,
then base my life on the Quran from that day forward. No one preached to me, and there was no question of hadith. I didn't even know what they were at the time.
mm, mm,
But I understood the Quran clearly enough to know that I had to confess my own shahada at that time in the privacy of my living room in the middle of the jungle in Borneo. So
mm.
this clarity it's there. You see,
Oh,
now you don't need the hadith to understand this. What you need is you need maybe an old man or an old woman with some years under their belt and under their feet to add some wisdom to what it is that the Quran is teaching you. And what I mean by wisdom is the wisdom of experience, because this also is knowledge, you see.
mm,
Now, if you're preoccupied with the hadith and you got a 500,000 hadith to learn, you don't have time to get experience.
absolutely. Mm,
You see,
mm.
there's no time to work. There's no
No,
time to
no,
sweat. There's no time for blood. There's no time for tears,
no,
even.
no, no,
You've got to do all this learning, you
no.
see. And if you're going to submit your students to that kind of indoctrination, they're going to have the same kind of problem. Maybe, and their problem will be different. They'll have the experience, but they won't be able to understand it because you've distorted it for them. You've distorted the words, you've distorted the comprehension, you've distorted the communication between what is above and what is below. You've created this iron uh, roof. So
yeah,
may it please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us
mm,
and our students to get clarity
yeah,
and to help them become informed and to stimulate them to study the more correct sources and to rely more upon communications with Allah and His angels rather than with these
yeah,
so-called salaf,
yeah,
sahabi, and
yeah.
their hadith. You see,
Mm, mm.
we need
Uh,
the direct relations. Yes, yes, brother. Go on.
can I maybe? I know we are running a bit over time now, but
Yeah,
I
we
just
should
want
stop
to,
soon.
because I'm also, I very much uh, get the same experience or feeling from some of our younger brothers and sisters, that they feel that lack of ease and comfort and satisfaction with their religion, with their deen, with their beliefs and their practice, what they get from Islam.
Mm,
And for me, how I can, maybe a word of advice to them is, we all seek that mutma'inna, that sense of comfort, of satisfaction.
yes.
I would almost use the English term equilibrium. We want
Hmm.
to reach an equilibrium within our souls, within our work, within our social lives,
Yes.
within our families. And the problem is that equilibrium requires a level of flexibility on your side.
Hmm.
Because you are not living in a Muslim country. Many of your listeners are listening in or viewing this channel from the US or from Britain, from English speaking societies. And the reason you're not reaching that equilibrium is because you have been robbed of the flexibility in your religion. You've been you have been you have been in, imposed with such a rigid system of practice
Hmm. Yes.
that you now find it almost impossible to reach that equilibrium within a society that is different, that is non-Arab. And I'm also a person, I work in this society. This is not a Quran or a Muslim society. But the day I realized that these people are all my brothers and sisters in humanity, that
Hmm.
my my strange practices, the way I eat, the way I dress, the way I pray, I need to become more flexible. I need to abandon false holy cows. And for example, why would we not enjoy a meal with our fellow citizens, people who are our work colleagues?
Yes.
Muslims are creating an ethnicity, and they are partitioning themselves. Why? Because they just feel that the demands of their religion um, makes it impossible for them to socialize or to interact or to engage with
Hmm.
other people. And
Yes.
so they become a nation within a nation, an isolated group, and they
Yes.
lose this, because then it creates what they call an incompatible situation between how they want to be and how they are forced to be.
Yes.
The identity becomes conflicted between what they need to do to survive and what they are allowed to do in this world. And
Yes.
the day I took off all those false requirements
Yes.
is the day I already took one huge step towards
Hmm.
reaching peace.
Hmm.
And my suggestion, as we come towards the last part, the final part of this discussion, to those who are tuning in, is that only apply or practice those requirements that are enshrined in the Holy Quran. Start with it. Start with it. And then you will have pleased Allah. You will have pleased Allah. And you will feel happy, because the Quran does not give detailed requirements or prescriptions. The Quran speaks about
Hmm.
hudud. The Quran speaks constantly about hudud. It does not speak about qanun and fiqh. In the Quran, fiqh is not there's no concept fiqh or sharia in the Quran.
Hmm.
The,
Hmm.
the word sharia does appear, but not in the sense of a sophisticated halakha,
Hmm.
Jewish
Yes.
halakha. No,
Hmm.
we have we have taken this Jewish halakha Muslim Muslim version It's our own choice. It's not the choice of Allah. We must abandon this Jewish alaka, this Muslim alaka. Abandon it. You look at the hudud. That is what you look at. And it's much easier for you to function within parameters than to function strictly, rigidly according to prescribed rules and regulations. And the hudud of Allah are very easy. The hudud of Allah, if you read the Quran, you, Dr. Zaid, you've read the Quran. The hudud of Allah are not difficult.
No,
it speaks about interest. Business is permissible by Allah, has been permitted by Allah, whilst interest has been outlawed. So the use of usury and so on has been outlawed. So these are the hudud of Allah. But it doesn't tell you what type of business. It doesn't tell you, how you should dress. There's no verse that says how you should dress. Why? There's no verse that says how you should shave your beard. Why on earth are you obsessed with beards? There's no verse that says that you must wear a head cover, men and women. There's no verse that says you must wear a head covering. No verse. There's a verse that says you should cover the attractive parts of your bosom, because that is really the aura is really the cleavage of women, and that is really the part of a woman that is sexually enticing for a man.
Yes, of course.
The hair is not sexually enticing for a man. In fact, the way the Arabs are dressing, all in black, the finger becomes enticing for men. The presence of a woman, mere presence, even within that black bag, becomes enticing or sexually alluring. So
this is extremism.
We should first of all decide. Let us take the Quran as the hudud, as the parameters, and then from there we will, in our own way, plot the way forward. And that I promise those of you who are younger, who are tuned into this channel, I can almost promise you, when you make that decision, when you say our kalima, it says La ilaha illallah. Now that La ilaha means there is no object worthy of worship or sacredness. You must include in that La ilaha the hadith.
Yes.
You see. Then you will come to Allah. La ilaha illallah is the Quran.
Yes.
And that will bring you very, very far to reaching that point of equilibrium and mutma'inna, inshallah. Shukran.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, brother. You said something there very interesting. Like to close on that thought and have our listeners consider it seriously, because this isolationism that you're describing, this sense of a community within a community, you see, is exactly what the Jews have done, you see, throughout history. So the Muslims have become just like them. They've followed them, with the strict adherence to this particular approach to what you call the halakha, the traditions of the Jews. That's what they are. So let us close there, brother, and let our listeners, our students, contemplate this. And may it please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them this light upon light and the relief of this burden that has been imposed on them by enemies of their souls, enemies of truth. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brother.
Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Shukran. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.